So we don't have to debate about what we should think about homosexual activity. It's written in the Bible.
In the early 2000s, Ted Haggard was recognized as one of the most prominent pastors in the United States. He was president of the National Association of Evangelicals, a best-selling author, served on several state boards, and spoke with then-President George W. Bush by phone every week. He pastored a megachurch of 14,000 people and taught conservative values, but Pastor Ted was living a double life, one that was more shocking than a chemistry teacher cooking some blue sky. In 2006, what Pastor Ted did in the darkness, literally, would come to light in front of the entire world.
That Reverend Haggard paid him for sex about once a month for 3 years, as well as for methamphetamines, which he says Reverend Haggard snorted before their sexual encounters. Haggard says he also contacted you for a massage in a Denver hotel room, but he maintains it was just to get the drugs, that there was no sexual contact. What do you say about that reaction?
That just doesn't make sense.
I woke up, opened my eyes, and looked out to the darkening skies. The world has gone crazy as blood fills the streets. Steal, kill, destroy, the cycle repeats.
This is the rise and fall of Ted Haggard and his scandalous return. Ted Haggard was born on June 27, 1956, to parents J.M. and Rachel Haggard in Indiana. His father was a veterinarian, but in his spare time, he founded a charismatic ministry that Ted regularly attended with his mother and siblings. Charismatic Christianity is a type of Christianity that stresses what they believe is the work of the Holy Spirit, spiritual gifts, and modern-day miracles as an everyday part of life. They believe these gifts allow them to do such things as heal someone and give prophecy over another's life, claiming it comes from their God.
If somebody's got demons, if somebody's bound by demons, they don't need the men in the white coats. They don't necessarily need medication. They need somebody with authority and power and anointing that says, "Be gone in the name of Jesus."
Charismatic Christians also believe in something called speaking in tongues, or the ability to interpret when somebody else speaks in tongues.
Somebody give God praise. Woo!
While in high school, Ted worked on the school's newspaper, something he was passionate about. At age 16, Ted heard evangelist Bill Bright speak in Texas, and this became a pivotal moment in his life, leading Ted to rededicate his life to Christ. After graduating high school, he enrolled in college for a degree in communications. Young Ted Haggard was excited to become a journalist, but an offer from his father would change the course of his life when his father offered to buy Ted a car. But not just any car. It was a brand new Pontiac Le Mans, blue, with tan leather seats. But there was a stipulation. Ted could only get this dream ride if he left his secular college to attend the evangelical Oral Roberts University in Oklahoma, where ORU students are forbidden to drink, smoke, or have sex before marriage. Ted wanted that car. He also wanted to be a world-renowned journalist, and at a conference decades later, Ted would say when he learned who Oral Roberts was, he thought, quote, "This is my entrance into some of the largest newspapers in the country. I can skip journalism school if I can find out Oral Roberts is sleeping with somebody other than his wife, or if I can catch him in a lie, or if I can catch him faking miracles." End quote. Ted accepted his father's offer, and the soon-to-be journalist sped off to his new university. Ted would later tell GQ magazine it was at ORU where he was taught he could pray through any issues instead of getting real help. One morning, during his first semester at ORU, Ted poured himself a bowl of Cheerios, and while eating breakfast, Ted claimed he was visited by what Christians call the Holy Spirit. This spirit wasn't craving a bowl of Cheerios, but instead brought a message for Ted. Ted claimed the Spirit called him to be a pastor. This was around the same time he met a young woman named Gail Alcorn, a fellow student at ORU. Ted was immediately attracted to Gail, but it wasn't a shared attraction, as Gail had a crush on a boy named Paul Osteen, the older brother of Joel Osteen, who also attended ORU at the time. While still on the hunt to expose Oral Roberts, Ted attempted to get closer to Gail, and in doing so, he would confess at a later date, quote, "I fully intended to expose Oral Roberts in order to advance my career, but Roberts got to me rather than me getting to him," end quote. Ted admitted he became suspicious of Oral Roberts' intentions with Gail, at one point being fully convinced the man was sleeping with her. "I was so heartbroken," Ted said. But Oral Roberts wasn't sleeping with Gail, and Ted never got to see his big break in journalism happen. Regardless, Ted continued his pursuit of Gail and finally convinced her to give him a chance after she broke up with her high school fiancé. Eventually, Ted asked Gail to marry him, and in the same year that he finished college, they were wed. Together, the couple would go on to have 5 children who were raised in the same religious environment Ted was raised in. Over the coming years, Ted took up a number of associate pastoral positions at various churches, until in the early 1980s when he was told by a close friend they had had a vision of Ted founding his own church in Colorado Springs. Ted believed this was his God's call to ministry, and so he resigned from his position as an associate pastor with Bethany World Prayer Center in Louisiana and moved to Colorado. Ted began his career as head pastor by holding prayer meetings with a small group of just 20 members in the basement of his home. As his followers grew, he called his congregation the New Life Church, and he motivated his congregants to "Apostolic power has blessed me. My only problems are with me, not with my enemy, not with circumstances, not with people," end quote. But Ted would have many problems with many people down the line. Over the coming years, Ted's congregation grew, and he soon had hundreds of people attending his church. To accommodate these new members, he moved from the basement into various rental spaces in strip malls. By the early 2000s, New Life Church had graduated from strip malls to a private campus in Colorado Springs with a congregation of more than 14,000 people. The church stood at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, and the building alone was worth his success. He was on a first-name basis with then-President George W. Bush and his advisors, with whom he spoke by phone every Monday. At the time, Ted was not known to be a traditional preacher. Instead of speaking on a regular stage, he spoke on a round one so his audience could be all around him, and he could see all of them. Rather than hold a Bible, he carried a Palm Pilot and showed up for sermons in blue jeans and driving a scooter to save on gas. He cared about the environment and didn't believe in young earth creationism, nor did he subscribe to the trauma-inducing left-behind rapture theology. Complete with a wide smile and chiseled features, Ted quickly became a poster boy for the evangelical movement and politically conservative values. Ted was considered by many to be a fun-loving pastor who preached about positivity and made his congregants laugh. Congregations, the pastor holds the most senior position and receives the highest pay, while others below the pastor have much less authority and receive pay proportional to their standing. Ted believed this restricted the church from being able to hold onto high-achieving employees who had a lot to offer but wouldn't wait around for the higher-paid positions as they might be snapped up by somebody else. He implemented a servant leadership model whereby all employees were considered equal and were therefore empowered to share ideas and innovations which could further the interest of the church. But the most pioneering part of this model was that all members of the staff would be paid the same scale, which was dependent only on how long you had been there and completely unrelated to your skills, experience, or position. It was this concept of a free market approach to religion that established Ted as a truly forward-thinking pastor. His reputation provided the leverage for Ted to secure a position as the president of the National Association of Evangelicals, or the NAE. The NAE is an association of 45,000 churches and 30 million believers and is one of the United States' most powerful religious lobbying groups. Life as Ted Haggard was enviable. He commanded an audience of thousands every Sunday, had a beautiful wife and children, some of whom were following his footsteps into the ministry, and he was regularly receiving 5- and 6-figure sums to deliver guest sermons at other congregations. It seemed there was no stopping Ted, and in 2005, he was named by Time magazine as one of the 25 most influential evangelicals in America. While the concepts of an equal opportunity workplace sound reasonable and even admirable, Ted's other teachings were much more conventional and devout for Christianity. He held firm views on homosexuality and sex outside of marriage and pregnancy. These views were already solidly established in his early teen years when he took up a position as co-editor of his high school newspaper. In this role, he regularly published articles defaming those who didn't abide by his strictly religious principles. But that was nothing compared to what he would do once his philosophy in preaching was to fight against what he called the evil forces of homosexuality. Ted fanatically told his followers they were soldiers in a religious war and encouraged his congregants to physically barricade businesses that sold services he didn't approve of, businesses like massage parlors and liquor stores. As pastor of New Life Church and head of the NAE, Ted preached for what he believed was the sanctity of marriage as union between a man and a woman. By 2006, Ted was an outspoken supporter of the Colorado Amendment 43 to the Colorado Institution, which stated, quote, "Only a union of one man and one woman shall be valid or recognized as a marriage in this state," end quote. Despite the state's constitution at the time already defining marriage between a man and a woman, gay marriage opponents, including Ted, sought to ensure no future amendments could be made which would include gay marriage. Ted activated his congregation of soldiers to fight for the amendment to be passed, as well as objecting to the initiative which would provide same-sex couples with the equivalent legal protections afforded to married couples. In Ted's book titled Dog Training, Fly Fishing, and Sharing Christ in the 21st Century, Ted stated, quote, "I want my finances in order, my kids trained, and my wife to love life. I want good friends who are a delight and who provide protection for my family and me should life become difficult someday. I don't want surprises, scandals, or secrets. I want stability and at the same time, steady forward movement." End quote. One would think a conservative pastor who preached about hope for a life without scandals and secrets wouldn't regularly visit a male masseuse in the middle of the night and use illegal substances, but Pastor Ted Haggard was breaking bad. On the morning of November 2nd, 2006, Ted Haggard was sitting on his son's bed with his wife when he received a text message on his phone. It was from a friend of the couple who was letting him know a gay escort in Denver was going public with allegations against a prominent evangelical pastor. The man hadn't identified who his allegation was against, but he was going to reveal their identity on a radio station the following morning. Gail read the message the same time as Ted and asked him if he had anything to do with it. Ted reassured her in no uncertain terms that it was definitely not him, but Gail had every reason to be concerned, as in the early stage of their relationship, Ted revealed to her his homosexual thoughts. But Ted reassured Gail he was indeed a heterosexual man and it was just the devil tempting him. And Gail believed him. Confident in Ted's reassurances, the couple tuned in together to listen as the interview was aired on a local station the following morning. In the broadcast, Mike Jones, who was a sex worker and masseuse, declared Pastor Ted Haggard had been paying him for sex for 3 years. But it wasn't just that. Mike Jones claimed Ted also bought and used crystal during each and every one of their encounters. Mike told the interviewers he came forward after learning of Ted's identity as an evangelical pastor who spent considerable time at the pulpit preaching anti-homosexual sentiments. At the same time Mike exposed his dealings with Ted, Colorado laws restricting rights for gay couples were due to be voted on the following week. Because of this, Mike shared he felt compelled to come forward, saying, quote, "It made me angry that there's someone preaching against gay marriage and going behind the scenes having gay sex. I had to expose the hypocrisy. He is in the position of influence of millions of followers, and he's preaching against gay marriage. But behind everyone's back, he's doing what he preached against. I needed to expose what was happening. You can't say one thing and do another. There are consequences to our actions." End quote. Mike went on to detail the origin of the relationship, recalling that Ted had responded to an ad he had posted on a gay escort website. He claimed that Ted was careful to conceal his identity, going by the name Art, and calling from a payphone to arrange what would be for Ted a secret meeting. The pair would meet once a month, with Ted parking his SUV or scooter around the corner from Mike's home and arriving under the cover of darkness. Mike never thought much of his regular client, but one day while watching TV, Art came on screen. Mike paused and thought, "That's Art, but why are they calling him Ted?"
I think I know what you did last night. If you send me $1,000, I won't tell your wife. If you use any of this, I'll sue you.
It was then that Mike learned Art was Ted, and Ted's real name was Ted Arthur Haggard. While listening to Mike's detailed account, Gail laughed out loud at the accusations. The idea of her devout husband using illegal substances and engaging in homosexual encounters with a sex worker were too outlandish to believe. She knew her husband was a God-fearing man, and if Ted was tempted to do what Mike claimed, Gail was sure Ted would have told her. She reassured Ted they would weather the storm together. The day after Mike's shocking claims were made public, Ted published a number of statements denying any involvement and seeking to discredit Mike Jones. Ted said, quote, "I did not have a homosexual relationship with a man in Denver. I am steady with my wife. I'm faithful to my wife. I have never done drugs, ever. Not even in high school. I didn't smoke pot. I didn't do anything like that. I'm not a drug man. We're not a drinking family. I don't smoke cigarettes. I don't socially drink. We don't socially drink. We don't have wine in our house. We don't do that kind of thing." End quote. Ted went about his usual business in the days following, attending sermons and business meetings. His many political and religious allies pledged their support to Ted, and they emphasized the allegations against him were politically motivated and only publicized to deflect attention and support for the upcoming vote on the legalization of gay marriage. James Dobson, another popular evangelical, issued a statement of support for Ted, saying, quote, "It is unconscionable that the legitimate news media would report a rumor like this based on nothing but one man's accusations. Ted Haggard is a friend of mine, and it appears someone is trying to damage his reputation as a way of influencing the outcome of Tuesday's election, especially the vote on Colorado's Marriage Protection Amendment, which Ted strongly supports." End quote. But only 2 days after these statements, Ted resigned as president of the NAE and temporarily stepped down as head of New Life Church. Ted reassured his supporters that he wanted to allow for an independent investigation to be undertaken and his name cleared before he made any further statements. Gail rarely left Ted's side as the couple displayed a united front at every opportunity. Gail believed her husband was innocent, and she wasn't about to let their political opponents think they had won in tearing the two apart. By now, Mike Jones was being hounded relentlessly by the media. They questioned every part of his story and demanded proof of his supposed relationship with Ted. Mike agreed to take a polygraph test to substantiate his claims. A Colorado radio station organized such a test, but Mike's answers about whether he had had sex with Ted indicated a degree of deception. The administrator of the test stated that this could have been related to Mike's stress and lack of sleep in the days prior to undergoing the polygraph. But Ted pounced on these results, declaring they proved his innocence and that Mike's allegations were just that, unsubstantiated allegations. In the aftermath of the claims, the congregation of New Life Church rallied around to support Ted and his family. After all, he was their founding leader, and he had long preached against homosexuality and illegal substances. There was no way he could have been involved in such a scandal. No. In their minds, this was just another trial God had laid down in the religious war, and as soldiers, they weren't about to give in to it. But Ted's declarations of innocence were about to unravel, as the following morning, Mike Jones was back on the radio with proof of his and Ted's relationship. You see, Mike Jones had saved voicemails Ted left on his phone, and now Mike was ready to share them.
Hello. Please leave a message after the tone.
Hey, I was just calling to see if we could get any more, either $100 or $200 supply. And I can pick it up really any time. I could get it tomorrow, or we could wait until next week sometime.
When Gail heard the voicemails, she knew that was her husband's voice. She knew then that her husband had been involved with illegal substances. There was no point denying it any longer, and that night, Ted confessed to his wife and children. Yes, he had bought drugs from that man, and yes, he had used them. But he reassured his family there was no 3-year affair as Mike had claimed, and that nothing sexual had ever occurred between the two men. Once again, Gail believed her husband's word to be true. They had always enjoyed a very regular and satisfying sex life, which she believed meant he was obviously straight. Gail believed his urges were just another temptation she could help her husband overcome if they could just pray and believe hard enough. After all, they had founded an entire church based on the idea of forgiveness and acceptance through God. With the support of their congregation, they would weather the storm. Despite admitting to Gail about using the illegal substance, to the public and his congregation, Ted and Gail maintained their facade. Ted continued to deny he had ever used substances of any kind and went about his business with an air of a falsely accused man. At the time, the pastor who was covering for him at New Life Church, Ross Parsley, wrote an email to the New Life Church community detailing that Ted had admitted to purchasing crystal but continued to deny having had sex with Mike or using the illegal substance himself. While all of this went down, Ted and his wife were questioned by a reporter waiting outside their property.
Well, we can't get into much. We're a little late for an appointment.
Okay.
But as we talked the other night, we're so grateful that he failed the polygraph test this morning, and my accuser did.
And I know that Nicole asked you to deny, but I have to ask you again, have you used meth?
No, I have not.
Okay, and the voice expert that is in Denver that was hired by KUSA has matched now 18 of the words left on the voicemail message.
I did call him.
Voice.
I did call him.
And what did you call him about?
I called him to buy some meth, but I threw it away.
And who were you buying the meth for?
No, I was buying it for me, but I never used it.
Have you ever used meth before?
No, I have not.
So.
And I did not ever use it with him.
And did you ever have sex with him?
No, I did not.
And at what point did you decide to throw away the meth?
Right after. I never kept it very long because it was wrong. I was tempted. I bought it, but I never used it.
And how did you know that he would sell it to you?
He told me about it. I went there for a massage. So, okay, we're late for our appointment, and so, but thank you for your work.
How did you find him to get a massage from him?
A referral. From the hotel I was staying at.
The hotel where?
I've stayed at a lot of hotels in Denver because I write in Denver. So, okay?
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Pastor.
All right.
Thank you very much.
The day Ted admitted using to Gail, they made an appointment to meet with their family attorney. When they arrived at the office, the couple were invited into a private conference room, but shortly after, their attorney would ask to speak to Ted alone. It was a little while later when their attorney came out to retrieve Gail, but before bringing her back into his office, he said to her, "Ted has something he wants to tell you." Ted sat across from his wife, but his face was not the confident face of the man she had just walked in with. Ted looked into Gail's eyes and told her the truth. Everything Mike Jones claimed had occurred was true. Using of the illegal substance, the sexual encounters, and the late-night meetings. And Ted had something more to say. It wasn't just Mike. Ted then implied some of his behavior was Gail's fault. Ted told her how on one particular occasion when he was attending a church event in Cripple Creek, Colorado, he texted Gail and asked her to join him. Gail was busy hosting a New Life Church barbecue and planning Ted's upcoming 50th birthday party, so she declined his invite. While sitting in their attorney's office, Ted told Gail it was after she turned down his invite that he became overwhelmed with a need for companionship. So he texted a young volunteer from their church and asked him to join Ted at the hotel. Ted texted the young man to ask if he wanted to be godly or bad that night. And when the man arrived at his hotel room, Ted performed intimate acts in front of him. In the midst of Gail's stunned silence, Ted reassured her it was a mistake, that he regretted his behavior and he was working on recovering from what he called gay urges. Although Gail was angry, disgusted, and betrayed, she sadly began to blame herself. She wondered what his actions meant about her. She demanded Ted answer her. Was she not enough? Was she not attractive to him? What else wasn't he telling her? At home that night, Gail considered for the first time the physical implications of Ted's encounters with men. What if they had an STD or something worse? She felt sick, and yet when Ted reached for her in bed that night, Gail decided she should overcome these feelings, just like she had coached many women in their marriages before. Gail believed this is what God wanted from her, and she had to abide by her vows to Ted, no matter his betrayal of those same vows. She swore to herself that she would forgive Ted and stand by his side, no matter what came to light about her husband's true nature. But what she didn't know is that there would be so much more to still come out. Just 2 days after the email proclaiming Ted's innocence went out, his congregation was notified that Ted had been fired. The email stated in no uncertain terms that Ted had been involved in what New Life described as sexually immoral conduct. All of a sudden, the friends and allies that had once sung his praises began to distance themselves from Ted. They also sought to downplay any influence he might have once held in religious and political spheres, especially in relation to the upcoming vote. Ted no longer had his weekly conversations with the president, and he could no longer preach from the pulpit. Ted was compelled by the church's leadership to attend intensive religious counseling in the wake of the scandal. Former colleagues said they would support him through a period of spiritual healing, and after only 3 weeks, Ted was determined to be completely healed, with one of the pastors involved in his counseling declaring that Ted was completely heterosexual. The counseling Ted likely underwent is what's known in Christian circles as conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a dangerous and discredited practice that falsely claims to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity or expression, and many times in Christian churches, those who are doing the so-called counseling are not licensed therapists or psychologists. Despite Ted's scandal, his termination wasn't a total loss for him. Ted was provided with a substantial separation agreement that required him to cut off all contact with members of the church, and he was forbidden to comment on the matter for 2 years, perform no ministry-related work, and move his family out of Colorado immediately. Ted was exiled, but he was exiled with a severance that provided 14 months' salary for him and Gail, totaling about $200,000, and the family quickly moved to Phoenix, Arizona. It was around this time that an email surfaced in which Ted admitted to intimate acts performed on him by Mike and taking illegal substances, just as Mike had alleged. To the surprise of most, despite being fired from New Life Church and being banned from any services related to the denomination, Ted was still receiving regular invites to give guest sermons at other churches. As the severance package payout drew to an end, Ted needed a new plan. He made plans to move back to Colorado Springs as soon as the agreement ended, hoping to reestablish himself as a pastor. He knew he wouldn't be able to do it on his own. He needed the backing of his previous supporters. And so, almost to the day that the 2-year media silence agreement came to an end, Ted and Gail announced they would be speaking out on what many thought of as a media apology tour. As part of coming clean to the American public, Ted agreed to take part in an HBO documentary titled The Trials of Ted Haggard. In this documentary, Ted was shown as having to take a job selling insurance to pay the bills, despite the show being filmed during the time he was receiving payment from the severance agreement. But Ted's public displays of humility and fall from grace seemed to work on changing the minds of the congregation that had turned against him. After the show aired, Ted and Gail made appearances on The Oprah Winfrey Show, Larry King Live, and Good Morning America, with Ted dutifully apologizing for his behavior. Far from decrying the actions of her husband, Gail gushed that the scandal had made their marriage stronger. She even made coy remarks about how their sex life was better than ever. Above all, Gail claimed that due to the scandal, she now understood her husband more fully and was in a better position to support him with what she called his same-sex temptations, though Ted declared he had been cured of his homosexual desires by prayer. The couple also volunteered to appear on the show Wife Swap, where Gail and the actor Gary Busey's fiancé traded places for a week. The show was an attempt to show the forgiving nature of Christianity and the strength of the Haggard family unit. In the show, the family decried the haters who had treated Ted so badly in the aftermath of Mike Jones's claims. Ted was desperate to be seen as a redeemed man, a humble sinner who had repented and been cleansed of his sins. And Ted knew how to use his media appearances as a platform from which he could begin his great comeback, even telling a handful of reporters that, quote, people love a good comeback story, end quote. In a 2011 interview with GQ, Ted would admit that if he was young again and in his 20s, he would call himself bisexual. When asked why he doesn't do that now, Ted said because he has a wife and children, and they like their ordinary life. Off the back of his media appearances, Ted announced that he was going to begin holding public prayer meetings in the barn of his Colorado Springs home. This announcement and Ted's recent TV appearances overshadowed a damning press release from New Life Church. The press release stated that a young, male member of the congregation had come forward with essay allegations by Ted from his time as head of the church. This young man was the church volunteer Ted told Gail about, who came to visit him in Cripple Creek while Gail was planning Ted's 50th birthday party. The young man's name is Grant, and before Mike Jones ever came forward with allegations against Ted Haggard, New Life Church and Ted attempted to cover up what Ted had done. Ted and his New Life board members promised to pay Grant hush money and attempted to push the aspiring young pastor out of the church. But Grant decided to fight back. This is part of a news interview Grant gave after deciding he had had enough of being silent and filed a lawsuit. In this interview, Grant releases phone call recordings between Ted and himself.
The way it works, I wasn't an honorable pastor. And I wasn't honorable with you. So you deleted all those text messages?
Yes.
Wow. And you didn't save them in any other form?
I didn't save them. I don't have them saved to my computer. I don't have them saved. It was a different phone. I even have a new phone now.
Well, Grant, thank you for doing that. It's better to forgive and let it go.
Yeah.
Forgive the people that have wronged you. I've wronged you. Forgive me. If the church has wronged you, forgive it.
Grant's accusations and news interview came on the heels of Ted and Gail's media tour, and Ted denied the allegations. And just as he had in the early days of his evangelical career, he gathered his small congregation and took his position as the head of his small home-based church. By 2010, his congregation had swelled, and Ted established the St. James Church in its own building in Colorado Springs. The new church quickly attracted hundreds of New Life members, as Ted marketed St. James Church with ads and sermons that claimed his experiences had provided him with insights into sin and grace that other pastors lacked. But less than 2 years later, Pastor Ted was up to his old tricks. In 2012, it was reported by MinistryWatch.com that Ted was counseling a young man overcoming an illegal substance addiction. Ted allegedly asked the young church member to buy him some of his favorite illegal substance. When confronted by a St. James elder, Ted acknowledged the purchase and reportedly handed over a briefcase he had in his possession. Once opened, the elder found crystal, well-used drug paraphernalia, a sex toy, and gay porn. But this wasn't Ted's first rodeo, and in his new church, he was now the sole leader with what seemed like very little oversight. This scandal was handled internally. Pastor Ted, as judge and jury, had found he had sinned and once again decided to forgive himself. Around that same time, Gail published a book titled Why I Stayed. In it, she details the ordeal from her perspective, focusing mainly on her relationship with her God as the reason to maintain the relationship with her husband. The book received mixed reviews primarily due to the fact that Gail focused on why her husband should be forgiven for his sins rather than the damage and repercussions that Ted's action had caused both to the LGBTQ+ and religious communities. Gail wrote in her book, quote, "Ted and I believed God used a gay masseuse to rescue Ted from the sin that was destroying him. God has used the devil to accomplish his will." End quote. Ted had always labeled his gay encounters as mistakes, lapses in judgment, and sinful. It's sentiments like these, along with Gail's dehumanizing rhetoric that ridicule, minimize, and invalidate the experience of members of the LGBTQ+ community for whom their experiences are real, valid, and normal.
Let me ask your wife a question. Gail, what was it like when you found out that your husband had slept with a male prostitute?
Well, I was shocked on many levels. I did not know that he had this going on in his life, this struggle going on. I didn't know that he was acting out on it, and so I was devastated by it.
Why did you stay with him?
Well, I feel like that is an important question for me to answer, and that's why I wrote a book by that title, Why I Stayed. And it took me a book to explain my position on this, but basically it's that I believe that my husband was so much more than the struggle that was going on in him, and I wanted to find out why this developed. I wanted to understand it, and I wanted to fight for my marriage. After all, this is my husband, this is my marriage, and I really wanted us to get to the other side because I felt there was so much value in the life that we had built together.
Gail, do you doubt his story about being a heterosexual who suddenly had sex with a male prostitute, or do you think there's a part of him that is denying who he really is?
I don't think he's denying at all who he really is. I think he is identifying who he is in this process. And I've lived with this man now for more than 30 years, so I know that there is so much to his life that validates that he is who he says he is.
But I just, a lot of folks are listening, and I just want to be as open and as honest with you as I think I possibly can be. It's almost like a person who's gay just all of a sudden saying, I'm going to go over here and be non-gay, or a person who's a heterosexual all of a sudden waking up one day and saying, I think I'm going to go have a homosexual relationship with a man in a hotel room. It doesn't sound... It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. Can you somehow make it make sense to me? If you're heterosexual, why were you even thinking about having a homosexual relationship, Ted?
The boxes that people construct in their mind don't fit for most people. And so when we have a heterosexual person that has when we have a homosexual person that has a heterosexual encounter, we don't say he needs to come out of the closet and admit that he's really a heterosexual. And so things are confusing in sexuality, things are complex in sexuality, and we're seeing that more and more and more because of the internet and things like that.
For a while, Pastor Ted managed to fly under the radar, but by 2019, Ted was again engaging in questionable touching with young males, according to videotape claims from 2 St. James church members. When Reverend Kirk Sethman, a St. James elder, confronted Ted, Ted called the police, claiming a delusional man had him cornered in his office. The Colorado Springs Police Department has declined to release a report on the call. A group of the church elders asked Ted to step down from the pulpit, but he refused, setting up division in the church with many people leaving. On April 1st of 2022, St. James Church sold its building for $1.95 million. Ted claimed proceeds from the sale would help, quote, paying all our debts, and that he would reimburse himself and Gail for the times they had to cover church expenses. Ted also claimed $300,000 from the sale went to missions working with Ukraine, but he declined to say which organizations received the money or provide documentation, saying in a recent sermon, quote, "It's gone, so if any of you get any ideas, it's already gone," end quote. Ted again denied the claims, but the dam was open, and over the coming weeks and in 2022, more and more claims against Ted have been made both from the current and previous churches and acquaintances. In the state of Colorado, its current law lists 39 professions that are required by law to report suspected harm done to a child. The list includes clergy members from any religious body, but unfortunately, it specifically exempts them from reporting what they learn in confidential communications as deemed by the church. For example, a Catholic priest learning of abuse during a parishioner's confession. The state of Colorado has a new task force investigating the law that is due to report back in 2024. After selling the church, Ted once again moved his prayer sessions back into his home. These days, the Holy Spirit isn't leaping out of cereal boxes with messages for Ted, and Ted continues to host prayer meetings at his home where he announced to his congregation that he is developing the basement into a room where kids can play games and use the pool table. He regularly uploads to his YouTube channel titled St. James Church. Ted Haggard also works part-time as a Lyft driver. Gail Haggard continues to stand by her man. As for Mike Jones, he shared the impact of coming forward in an interview with GQ magazine. He too released a memoir titled I Had to Say Something, in which he details his experiences with Ted and says that they are far from the claims of a massage gone wrong as Ted would have people believe. But the effect on Mike's life has been much more devastating than that of Ted. Mike has struggled to find regular employment, and when potential boyfriends Google his name, they run after reading about his history.
I cannot speak for others, but I know what my intentions were and my motive. I wanted to expose the injustice and the hypocrisy. That's why I did it. I didn't do it for fame and fortune. But I will tell you right now, most of my anger is at New Life Church. For over 2 years, I have suffered being alone out there, taking all the heat for all this going on, when all this time they knew there was others. And they paid hush money to this man to be quiet. When they could have admitted it, there was others right at that moment, and that would have helped me out so much, instead of putting me out there to face it all on my own. I am so angry at the church. They stated at the time that Mike Jones was the only man out there that had relations with Ted Haggard, and it's wrong, and it was a lie, and they owe me an apology. New Life Church has hurt me deeply, and I guess because they think I was just escorting, that I'm just a useless piece of meat out there, and it has hurt me deeply. Thank you for listening.
Mike said, quote, I wouldn't do it again. It's ruined my life too. End quote. Perhaps one of the saddest things of all is that those who claim to offer unconditional love often tell others they're defective for who they choose to love. Just as the same was told to a young boy with dreams of one day becoming a journalist. This has been the rise and fall of Ted Arthur Haggard. If you are a fan of learning about scams, cults, and cautionary tales, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you'll be notified when a new documentary comes out. My name is Josie, and thank you so much for watching.
That many digest like a meal with 5 courses. Like wild running horses, we flee from the truth and drink up the lies as we confuse our youth. Oh, but don't lose heart and don't you dare let go. There's always hope in tomorrow, and we make a way by working to save our today. You may not understand, but know there's a promised land. And the day may be dark, but yet still we must fight. Let shadows bow down to the light.